One September morning, long before the sun had risen over the dry hills of northern Nevada, Dawn Wells left the warmth of her bed to walk barefoot across cold wooden floors. She crept through the silent corridors of her ranch-style home, listening to the echoes of her own heartbeat. Clutched in her hand was a yellowed envelope stuffed with letters she had once intended to burn. Instead, she kept them tucked away in a kitchen drawer behind the seldom-used silverware. Later, she admitted to a close friend that the letters felt more alive at night, almost as though they whispered to her. And so, in that early dawn hush, she paced through her living room, passing framed photos of her father's old truck and little keepsakes from the set of Gilligan's Island, thinking of how different the world was when she'd first penned those words. Such was Dawn Wells's private side, a woman not merely defined by a spunky pig-tailed character, but by tender secrets, intricate hopes, and profound reflections, on a life spent half in the public eye and half in the wide open spaces she adored. In truth, Dawn's devotion to home was less about opulence and more about creating places where she could slow down, gather her thoughts, and share them only with those she trusted implicitly. Behind every choice of doorknob or throw pillow, behind every orchard she tended or window view she cherished, lay a reflection of her earnest longing for comfort. For Dawn, architecture was never simply design. It was the shape of her own heart. Born in Reno, Nevada, to a family that valued independence, the young Dawn wanted to carve out a space where she could escape life's chaos. Though many fans know her best as Marianne Summers, a sweet, wholesome ingenue marooned on a TV island, her real beginnings were neither extravagant nor star-studded. She grew up with a keen sense of community in a town that still had dirt roads and open fields. Those surroundings shaped her taste for cozy nooks, handcrafted decor, and the subtle but ever-present smell of fresh bread wafting from a neighbor's kitchen. Fame would one day pull her to Los Angeles and beyond, but a part of Dawn always longed for warm fabrics and rustic settings, reminiscent of her small-town upbringing. Her earliest brush with property ownership came in the mid-1960s, not long after Gilligan's Island first catapulted her into celebrity status. While some of her co-stars splurged on sleek modernist homes in the Hollywood Hills, Dawn chose an unassuming bungalow in Studio City. She was only in her 20s, still dazzled by Tinseltown's bright lights, but she knew she wanted something that felt grounded. The bungalow dated back to the 1930s, with a charming Spanish Revival facade, complete with terracotta roof tiles, a small courtyard garden, and a hand-carved front door rumored to have been imported from Spain. A friend close to Dawn recounted how she took great care in restoring the original wooden beams in the living room, polishing them until they gleamed in the afternoon sun. When visitors came by for coffee, they'd comment on how the house felt like a storybook cottage, half expecting a line of ivy to crawl in through a window. Yet for all its cozy nooks and homey vibes, that Studio City bungalow also bore witness to Dawn's frustrations. She might have been riding the wave of sitcom success, but she was also grappling with the strain of living under Hollywood's microscope. Days on set were a flurry of memorized lines and comedic timing, while nights were spent juggling personal appearances and warding off tabloid gossip. Beneath the arches of her living room, Dawn would read fan letters filled with admiration, sometimes tinged with an unsettling obsession. She installed wrought iron grills on her windows, not because she was showy, but because, as she confided to a friend, she feared being too easy to find. In time, her little house became an expression of that duality, a sweet, inviting refuge fortified against the world outside. Her next big move happened in the early 1970s, when she purchased a property at Lake Tahoe. She had said in an interview that Tahoe was where she felt her mind could wander freely, unbound by Hollywood's demands. She chose a rustic cabin perched on a quiet slope overlooking the water, with floor-to-ceiling windows that allowed the rolling waves of the lake to become part of the decor. The structure was originally built as a hunting lodge in the 1940s, its exterior clad in aged timber that gave off a fragrant pine scent during the summer heat. When the first snows of winter arrived, Dawn relished in the hush that blanketed everything. She would sit in a rocking chair by the massive stone fireplace, listening to embers crackle and sipping spiced cider while gazing out at the crystalline lake. This cabin was perhaps the purest distillation of Dawn's soul. She filled it with quilts sewn by her grandmother, mismatched porcelain cups from local thrift shops, and cedar chests brimming with old scripts, awards, and personal diaries. Friends who visited found themselves lulled by the environment. One actress who dropped by in the off-season said she felt as though time had taken a nap in that house, and Dawn giggled in agreement. It was precisely what she was after, a place where she could hear the sound of her own breathing, where her heartbeat might sync with the gentle lapping of the lake against the shore. She didn't need lavish parties or gilded chandeliers. She needed a refuge for her quieter self, the part that craved introspection and peace more than the demands of an unending spotlight. Tahoe was also where Dawn nurtured a small orchard, apples, pears, and cherries, planting each sapling with her own hands. Locals remember spotting her in old jeans, hair tied up, carefully pruning branches, and laying down mulch to protect the roots from the harsh winter cold. She once joked, "If I can keep these trees alive, maybe I can keep my sanity." Year by year, those trees grew, and so did Dawn's sense of belonging there. But even in this idyllic setting, showbiz found a way to intrude. Every so often, an intrepid fan would show up camera in hand, hoping to spot Marianne in the flesh. Dawn always greeted them graciously, but she confessed to a close confidant that it felt like a dream being interrupted. She yearned for anonymity, a yearning that would continue to shape her real estate decisions for decades to come. In the late 70s, with her career in a mild transition, fewer TV guest spots, more stage work, Dawn opted for a second California property, a quaint 2-bedroom condo near Burbank. This time, she hired a little-known interior designer who had worked on set designs for local theater productions. For Dawn, the synergy was perfect. She wanted a home that felt like a stage, where she could rearrange furniture, backdrops, and lighting on a whim. The designer introduced track lighting in the living room, plus hidden compartments behind thick velvet drapes to store scripts and costumes. Dawn even had a miniature stage built in the larger of the 2 bedrooms, where she would rehearse her lines with a sense of playful seriousness. It was rumored that late at night, she'd host impromptu readings for fellow actors who dropped by after a long day. Her condo became a spot for intimate soirees, where laughter echoed against the walls, and theatrical illusions mingled with the warm glow of table lamps. Yet it wasn't all theatrical fantasy. The kitchen in that Burbank condo was lined with old cookbooks, many handed down from her mother. Dawn took cooking seriously, perhaps as a way to ground herself in something tangible. At times, the smell of homemade bread or a simmering stew filled the hallway, drifting past the stage curtains. Visitors would remark on how the aroma of her cooking made the place feel more like a family home than a Hollywood crash pad. For Dawn, that balance was crucial. She needed her illusions, but she also needed an anchor. Without the comfort of a hearty meal and the memory of her mother's recipes, she might have floated away on the fantasy of TV sets and applause. In the early 1980s, her focus shifted once again, this time toward philanthropic work. She got involved in charitable endeavors for disabled veterans, often hosting small fundraising events at her properties. The Burbank condo, though cozy, wasn't practical for bigger gatherings, so Dawn scouted a larger property in the San Fernando Valley, discovering a sprawling ranch built in the 1920s that had fallen into disrepair. It was love at first sight. Ivy had overtaken the outer walls, the stable doors hung precariously off their hinges, and the roof needed extensive work. Most buyers would have turned away, seeing only the cost of renovations. Dawn, however, saw potential. She once described that moment as an instant recognition that this was a place with stories waiting to be told. Renovating the ranch became a passion project. She hired local artisans, insisting on the use of reclaimed wood for the beams and eco-friendly materials whenever possible. While her construction crew hammered and sawed, Dawn would wander the grounds in dusty boots, thinking about how best to preserve the ranch's history. A caretaker who worked there told a story about finding Dawn perched on a wobbly ladder, attempting to salvage stained glass windows from the upper floor. She nearly fell off in the process, but even that didn't deter her. The caretaker recalled her saying, "These windows have seen more sunsets than I have." When the ranch was finally restored, it was a showstopper, a warm blend of Spanish and Western influences, accentuated by carefully curated antiques and Southwestern textiles in deep, earthy colors. Visitors were drawn to the expansive veranda, where Dawn installed a row of rocking chairs that looked out onto the fields. There, amid the swirl of dust motes and golden afternoon light, you could sense the ranch's original spirit had been revived. This ranch was also where she hosted some of her most meaningful events. At one fundraiser for the local Veterans Hospital, Dawn serenaded a small group of guests with acoustic guitar renditions of classic country songs. She wasn't a professional singer, but she had a gentle, comforting voice that made you lean in. One attending nurse described the evening as the real Dawn Wells shining through. No cameras, no scripts, just heartfelt sincerity. It was also at the ranch that she started a tradition of inviting neighbors over for an annual harvest celebration. She'd cook for days, setting long communal tables in the yard, sharing laughter and homemade pies under star-filled skies. Even those who had only vaguely known her from television left with a sense that they had witnessed something authentic and kind, a hospitality that wasn't staged. By the time the 1990s rolled around, Dawn was splitting her time between Lake Tahoe and the ranch. Her Burbank condo still served as an intermittent crash pad for quick trips into the city. Then came a surprising twist. She took on an extended tour of theatrical productions across the country, appearing in everything from comedic plays to dramatic one-act pieces. The travel ignited a desire in her to find an even more secluded sanctuary, a place where she could retreat once the final curtain fell. She found it in Driggs, Idaho, a small town nestled against the grandeur of the Teton Range. It was the perfect middle-of-nowhere hideaway for someone who wanted to slip quietly off the map. The Driggs property was by no means lavish. It was a simple farmhouse with squeaky floorboards and a wraparound porch that offered panoramic views of rolling farmland and snow-capped mountains in the distance. The local real estate agent apparently said, "You could hear your own soul out here," Dawn agreed. On her initial inspection, she spent an hour just standing in the backyard, gazing toward the horizon where purple shadows gathered at the foot of the Tetons. She soon made that farmhouse her own. Out went the tired furniture left by the previous owners, replaced by comfortable seating in warm earth tones, and an eclectic array of knickknacks from her travels. Everything from a carved wooden figurine picked up in Southeast Asia to souvenirs from fan conventions in the Midwest. She also brought in a local craftswoman to paint a mural of wildflowers on the kitchen walls, replicating the area's vibrant meadows in summer. Even though it was well off the beaten path, Dawn made the farmhouse as welcoming as any city home, always ready to greet the occasional neighbor or friend who ventured that far out. But even in this corner of Idaho, the weight of fame lingered. Fans sent letters, some of which found their way to the local post office. A few brave souls even tried to drive out there, though the unpaved roads and lack of clear directions often turned them back. In one rare instance, a group of road-tripping college students recognized Dawn at the local grocery store. They followed her to the farmhouse, hoping to snag an autograph. She politely obliged, offering them iced tea on the porch. But when they left, she admitted to feeling a pang of helplessness. "I like to keep my public world and private world apart," she said quietly to a friend on the phone that evening. As with all her homes, the farmhouse was meant to be a boundary between the real Dawn and the Marianne everyone else thought they knew. Yet there were places within these homes even Dawn liked to keep hidden. A persistent rumor circulated among her circle about a secret vault in the ranch house. Supposedly behind a bookcase stacked with dusty first editions and old photo albums, there was a narrow door that led to a small fireproof room. In it, Dawn was said to store personal journals, heirlooms from her grandparents, as well as old correspondences, some from family, others perhaps from secret admirers. When confronted with this rumor, Dawn would smile coyly, neither confirming nor denying. "A girl's gotta have her secrets," she'd say. Another rumor, albeit less whimsical, revolved around the Tahoe cabin. After a particularly harsh winter, a local legend emerged that the ghost of a long-past logger haunted the shoreline near her property. Dawn never claimed to see it herself, but sometimes, in jest, she'd tell newcomers, "If you hear tapping on the deck, it's probably old Hank the logger coming by to borrow some sugar." Among these hush-hush stories and whispered mysteries, certain pieces of gossip held more than a grain of truth. One that stands out is the tale of the monogrammed life jacket. Allegedly, Dawn kept a single orange life jacket in the Tahoe cabin's coat closet, embroidered with the initials DW. She never explained its presence, leaving guests to wonder if it was a symbolic nod to her days on a mythical island, or perhaps a private inside joke. A friend once peeked at its label and noticed the name of a boat rental service in Maui, leading them to question if it was connected to a brief romantic escapade, a meaningful moment at sea, or simply a quirky collectible. Dawn, with a playful grin, would offer no clarification beyond a shrug and a cryptic wink. Over the years, Dawn's devotion to each property evolved in tandem with her personal growth. The woman who once guarded a tiny Studio City bungalow from prying eyes was the same one who later threw open the doors of her ranch to welcome an entire community. The shy young star who held intimate rehearsals in a Burbank condo eventually mustered the courage to mount major stage shows and travel the country on a never-ending quest to reinvent herself. And through it all, her homes were the living journals of her transformations, an ongoing narrative told through brick, wood, plaster, paint, and memories etched into corners where only she could see them. One particularly unusual visitor to her ranch was a Hollywood costume designer who had worked with Dawn on a short-lived theatrical production. He recalled being invited for dinner and finding Dawn in the greenhouse, trimming herbs for the meal. She'd planted rows of basil, rosemary, and thyme, which she used in hearty soups and stews whenever she entertained. The costume designer, impressed by her dedication, asked if she missed the bustle of Los Angeles. Dawn calmly replied, "Sometimes, but more often I think LA misses me." It was the sort of remark that encapsulated her grace and confidence. She was never really chasing the city's approval. Instead, she was forging a life where she could slip between bright lights and rural charm without apology. When comparing her various homes, you see a clear pattern. The city properties represented utility, closeness to the pulse of the entertainment industry, and a certain practicality. The Studio City bungalow, the Burbank condo, these were her war rooms, so to speak, where she prepared for auditions, met with producers, and maintained a professional foothold. Meanwhile, her places in Tahoe, Driggs, and the ranch in the San Fernando Valley were her sanctuaries. There, the walls told stories of solitude, creative reflection, and a longing for authentic connection. It's as if Dawn needed both spheres to exist side by side, the public performer and the private dreamer. Tapping into this duality, one can't help but notice how her interior design choices mirrored her internal emotional landscape. She often used warm, earthy color palettes, burnt oranges, muted greens, deep browns, and left corners filled with personal touches that invited you to linger. In nearly all her kitchens, one wall would be reserved for photos and postcards sent by friends, fans, and family. Dawn claimed these memory walls were her way of staying grounded. She arranged them haphazardly, pinned at odd angles, as though to say, life isn't a neat collage, but a wild, beautiful mess that deserves celebrating. Contrarily, each living room usually contained a statement piece, whether it was a massive fireplace at Tahoe or a set of hand-carved chairs at the ranch that commanded the space. Those pieces were iconic, like the roles she played. They caught your eye and reminded you whose domain you had stepped into. An intriguing corner of her personality emerged through her gardens. Almost every property featured some form of cultivated greenery. The orchard in Tahoe represented her nurturing side. The ranch's greenhouse displayed her industrious, self-sufficient spirit. And the Driggs farmhouse boasted a wildflower patch that symbolized her devotion to untamed beauty. Dawn rarely bragged about these gardens in interviews. Indeed, she spoke of them almost apologetically, as if embarrassed by how much they meant to her. But those who knew her well understood these patches of earth were places where Dawn wrestled with big questions: faith, career choices, personal regrets, and found a measure of solace digging her hands in the soil. In her private diaries, she wrote about the satisfaction of coaxing life from darkness, a metaphor for how she tried to navigate the ups and downs of show business. Few realized how much love and heartbreak went into her real estate decisions. Dawn married and divorced once briefly, and rumors circulated that one of the main catalysts for the split was her refusal to live in a more glamorous Hollywood home. She simply couldn't stand the idea of being ensconced in marble floors, sharp lines, and gleaming surfaces that felt sterile to her. Instead, she wanted space for a small library of dog-eared books, corners cluttered with crocheted blankets, and the scent of homemade cookies drifting in from the kitchen. After the marriage ended, she confided in a longtime friend, "I'd rather be alone in a place that feels like me than with someone else in a palace that doesn't." That line, more than any other, encapsulates her unwavering dedication to authenticity over display. In her final years, Dawn spent more and more time away from the city. The ranch and the farmhouse in Driggs became her primary refuges. Health concerns began to surface, and she found comfort in the simple rhythms of rural life: feeding the horses, tending the garden, and curling up in a sunlit spot with a good novel. Yet even as she slowed down, the essence of her spirit never waned. Sometimes she'd invite a few close friends for weekend visits, and they'd find her laughing in the kitchen, wearing an apron dusted with flour. While kneading dough for homemade bread, she might suddenly recount a funny mishap on the Gilligan's Island set or share a poignant thought on aging and mortality. In these moments, her homes came alive. The walls breathed in her stories. The floors trembled with her laughter, and the air shimmered with the glow of a life well lived. Toward the end, as she recognized her own impermanence, Dawn made it clear she wanted no grand tributes carved in stone. She preferred that her properties continue to serve as living spaces where new chapters could unfold. On a crisp autumn evening just months before her passing, she was seen walking around the ranch, lingering by the stable to stroke the horses' manes, then gazing up at the stars. A neighbor who observed her from afar thought she looked perfectly content, like she was saying goodbye but also promising to return in spirit. It was a simple, unassuming moment that spoke volumes about her acceptance and gratitude. If one is to draw a final reflection from Dawn Wells's long journey through these hidden realms, it might be this. She believed homes are more than architectural statements or investments. They are the intimate diaries of who we are. Each home she inhabited carried pieces of her laughter, her tears, her hopes for a life that transcended the shallow definitions of fame. The orchard at Tahoe, the secret vault in the ranch house, the stage in her Burbank condo, these were all puzzle pieces of her identity, layered over time. Perhaps the greatest lesson she leaves us is that a house becomes a home only when it's imbued with genuine warmth, quiet reflection, and the courage to remain true to oneself, no matter how loud the world outside might roar. And that's all for today's video. If you like this video, hit that thumbs up. Let us know your thoughts in the comments section and subscribe so you won't miss out on future uploads. See you next time.